There are many sayings in the endurance world like nothing new on race day, seconds in the end become minutes in the second half, which means, you go out a little bit too fast at the beginning, you'll be paying for it dearly towards the end. But of course, the ultra world has some other sayings that aren't used quite so much in other distance events. Like the ultra world says, beware of the chair, meaning that when you're in an ultra marathon, don't sit down because you might never get back up. It's definitely a lot harder. And I definitely see that when I've crewed and paced 100-mile races, miles 75, 80. People will sit down, lay down, and then never get back up. Except for the fact that, like, if you actually make them, like, say, okay, you can, like, sit down for 5 minutes and take a 5-minute nap. It's amazing how much a 5-minute nap will help you. Of course, another big one is to have a really good why. When you're out there, you need to have a why. I often ask people ask me, up to 50 miles, you can, even with a 50 mile or a marathon, you have to have a good why. But obviously, beyond 50 miles, you need to have a why. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody else but yourself. And oftentimes, it needs to be more than just to impress friends or get the finishing buckle. But that could be your why, but you definitely need a why. Coming off of last week's success, Sara was interviewed by the New York Times, and she just ran 2:20. So this year she went 2:22 at London for second place, and then won the Marathon Project in 2:20. So phenomenal performances in her later 30s. And in the article, she says, when you fail a lot, your why becomes really strong. And that would definitely be the case in terms of with her and the marathoning and her running career. And it's just something that, you've got to build success. It's built on failure, and you got to go for it. Sometimes it doesn't always work out. Sara also said that we can be an instant gratification culture, but I've had to cultivate a long-term approach to my career. I figured as long as I could keep working on my craft, chipping away, finding joy in the mundane, and then that had to be enough. And that's definitely true. That's why I'm going to be heading out just now in a few minutes. It's 6:40. I kind of slept in a little bit this morning. But I'll go out and get my miles in for my little bit of last minute taper for my 6 days in the home. And who knows how that will go. But you know what? I often tell my athletes, you've got to learn to enjoy the process. Not just look for the results. Enjoy the process. Toni Reavis, who's a great commentator in endurance events, especially marathons, he said after the Marathon Project, an interesting question that may be answered in the pandemic year of 2020 is whether running can stand on its own as a sport rather than as a civic tale of mass participation where charity, fundraising, economic impact, and human interest stories make up the heart of the enterprise, with a pro race merely an appendage leading the way. Can a simple race hold people's attention? And, and last week, you had the Marathon Project, and plenty of people were watching it, but it was probably just mainly running nerds. And, interesting to see, does the public care or interested in racing, road racing in general, or, do you have to have all the other things, which are fine, but here in the United States especially, the mass participation with the charity aspect and bringing in money to the communities. I mean, that's a reason why, Boston, LA, New York, all these, Chicago, all have these races. I mean, like LA Marathon, there's 25,000 people at $200 a pop. That's bringing in a big chunk of change. So it's an interesting question, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future once hopefully all this ends.
Kind of amusing that hasn't rained in months here in Bakersfield, and it's drizzling now. And tomorrow's a 90% chance of rain on day one of 6 days in the home. I mean, of course, Scott up in Canada is doing his whole thing on a treadmill. I can do it outdoors and was looking forward to doing it outdoors and not on the treadmill. Bakersfield weather is very much like Phoenix weather, where I did across the years many times. And of course, in Phoenix, occasionally it did rain, but man, they get typhoon-like rain. Comes down really hard. We just get this spitting kind of stuff. So hopefully it's starting today and maybe won't be happening tomorrow, but we shall see. Ironically, the only other race that I traveled to this year, Vegas, just went up there. I was supposed to do the 12-hour. I just went and did half marathon and called it a day. That was my goal right from the start. Just didn't really feel like doing 12 hours, but as I was driving out of Vegas, and it started pouring rain. So when I have a race, it seems to want to rain, which is odd, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Well, it's a Southern California Chamber of Commerce kind of afternoon. Nice sunny day. It's almost 60 out. Just got done with a little light walk with the weasel. Milo himself wanted to go along. He's definitely a fair weather dog. He likes to go walking when the weather's between 50 and 70 degrees, which is a few months every year here. So 7 years ago, I had just got into Phoenix on a day much like this for my first official 6-day race, which I've talked about on my 6 days with Giannis Kouros, which hopefully I'll be doing another episode soon. And so I'm just kind of hemming and hawing here, not really sure what we're going to do with the 6 days in the home. I just sent an email out to people. Hopefully we'll be able to put our results up on Run Sign Up like I've done with other races, like the race across Tennessee and some other ones. They don't really explain it too well. Got the little aches and pains that you always get when you're tapering. I always call them like phantom injuries come popping up. So my legs are achy and don't feel so well. Not really sure if I'm ready for the whole 6 days. A couple other athletes in the race reached out to me and feel nervous as well. I really wish I was doing it with people somewhere. Like I said, 7 years ago I headed out and did the race across the years, and then of course last year I was a Snowdrop 55. This year, the first 55 hours, I'm going to do that. So do some miles for 55 hours, submit them, and then start doing my 6 day. At least get 100 miles for the 6 days, and then who knows what I'm going to do after that. It's all kind of a big old head game, and should be an interesting time. It's supposed to rain tomorrow, which, it hasn't rained in months, as I talked about this morning. And then tomorrow is like a 90% chance of rain. Of course, Bakersfield, we don't really have rain. It's just a little light drizzle. So it should be interesting. And I will be talking to you guys throughout the event, and hopefully I will reach some of my goals and not have a complete flame up like I did in 2019.
Saw this tweet from Greg McMillan. It says, the 5 S's of sports training are stamina, speed, strength, skill, and spirit. But the greatest of these is spirit. And he attributes it to Ken Doherty. Not sure which Ken Doherty he means, so I looked up Ken Doherty on Google, and the first one that comes up is a snooker player, which is kind of like a form of pool. So he's a professional Irish snooker player. Who knew? We all know that the internet does read our minds because it's reading all of our texts and emails. I mean, if you ever want to buy something, just Google it. Next thing you know, you'll get plenty of ads for it, and then also some good discounts and stuff. But it's interesting, I'm often talking about walking and running, and walking versus running, and my whole Shakespeare, to run or not to run, that is the question. And then, of course, on Twitter, I only follow about 30 different groups and organizations and people, and one of my followers was Podium Runner, and wow, they popped up and had an article about a case for minutes instead of miles when you run, and I really am an advocate of that. I follow training programs, and the training programs I post on Training Peaks with my athletes are always based on minutes, because minutes are something that you can take into account for. So here in Bakersfield, when it's 100 degrees, minutes in the summer are different than minutes in the winter. Not different, but I meant like if I say, go out and do 5 miles and it's 105 out, that's a lot different than like today when it's 55 out. So doing minutes is a much better way to train. And as you get fitter and fitter, you end up doing more miles to begin with. And I wish that a lot of articles when they write about elite athletes, I wish they'd quit putting, he does 100, 120 miles a week, because you hear that and you think, I could never do that. But it's also because you don't have that much time. I mean, I used to do 100-mile weeks, and it, took me 30 hours at 3 miles an hour. But, these elite guys, when they're running, say, 9 miles an hour on easy days, so they say they're doing 6-minute miles, 10 miles an hour, they get 100 miles in 10 hours a week. And 10 hours a week, if you're a professional athlete, shouldn't be that much compared to a lot of other sports, cycling, triathlon, and stuff like that. So minutes are a great way to train, and you should definitely check that article out. It is a members-only article on Podium Runner, but basically that's the theme of it is you can just control. Because the problem, too, is when you run by mileage, you tend to want to always race your workouts all the time, what did I do yesterday, my 5 mile or 10K, and so you sometimes on your easy days are not going as hard, going too hard, and vice versa. Interesting, throughout the years I've been started coaching high school in 2006 and coaching adults in 2009, and almost all my athletes, if I did have them do a out and back timed of thing, they would go out and I say I do a 2-hour run, and they'd go out for an hour and then turn around and come back. And, the idea is to come back quicker. And all of them would do the workout the way it was. But then my oldest son, who started running with me in his freshman year in high school, the summer before his freshman year, and he made the varsity squad off and on his freshman year. It was full on the varsity his senior year. His sophomore year. But he takes everything very literally, as I've spoken before. He's Aspergy. And so I sent him out I said, okay, do 2 hours. And he comes back in 90 minutes. And I was thinking, okay, that was kind of crazy. And what it was is he walked out an hour and then ran home, which wasn't really the point of the workout. But he's one of the few people I would say, oh, go do 12 miles. And that way I know he'd go out 6 and then come back 6. So it's kind of an interesting take on that whole thing.